Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, ERP Selection, 5 Best Practices, 5 Big Mistakes. Our goal for today is to provide you with beneficial insights that will help you get the most out of your enterprise technology investments. Before we get started, let me review a few of our guidelines for the session. Attendee phones will be muted for the duration of the presentation. Please feel free to send me a chat if you run into any technical difficulties during the event. We encourage everyone to submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We will address your questions during the Q&A segment at the conclusion of the discussion. You can access both the chat and Q&A features of Zoom by hovering your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the icons. Today's session will run for 45 minutes and conclude at 1:45 p.m. Central Time. Our agenda includes a brief introduction to Ultra Consultants and our presenters for today's session. We'll move quickly on to the main event, a thoughtful discussion with insight on best practices for ERP selection and common mistakes to avoid. Then we'll share some additional resources that are available to today's audience before moving on to Q&A during the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. I'd like to take a brief moment to let you know that Ultra Consultants is serving as your host today and to tell you a little bit about who we are. Since 1994, manufacturers and distributors throughout North America, as well as companies with global operations, have teamed with Ultra as trusted advisors and industry best practice experts to guide them through their business process improvement and enterprise technology transformation journeys. As independent ERP consultants, our team is part of our client's organization, working shoulder to shoulder with ERP project teams throughout the country. Being a vendor independent consulting firm means two main things. First, we are your partner for guiding you in your vendor education and selection, and that's where we help you get to know in depth the enterprise software vendors and implementation practices that are best for your company and your unique project needs. Second, we are also your partner for helping you discover how to make improvements throughout your organization using your chosen technologies. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Ultra, or you can visit us at ultraconsultants.com. This is Kristen Renda, Marketing Program Manager at Ultra, and your moderator for today's webinar. I'd like to welcome Dave Lechleitner, Industry Marketing Director with Ultra Consultants. Dave is a longtime industry consultant. Dave has more than 25 years of experience helping mid-market manufacturing companies leverage technology to optimize processes, increase efficiency, maximize throughput, and boost productivity. Would also like to welcome Michael Chesson, Strategic Alliance Director with Ultra. With more than a decade of experience in sales and relationship management, Michael has developed a deep passion for helping companies grow through technology. With Ultra, Michael works closely with today's leading software vendors in the industry, enabling successful relationships for both the Ultra team and for our clients. Thank you both for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Kristen, for inviting us. Great to be here and excited to go through the content and make a special announcement today as well. And Michael, great to join with you on the webinar today as well.
Always great to be with you both, Kristen and Dave. Thanks so much for having me, and very excited to discuss industrial equipment and machines and best practices and selections.
Awesome. Thanks. Happy to have both of you. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's discussion. I'd like to touch on some common mistakes that we've encountered throughout the years in our role as independent ERP consultants. The ERP selection process can be long and complicated, and studies consistently show that half of ERP implementations fail to achieve their goals. So Dave, in your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that project teams should be aware of as they embark on a new technology selection process?
Hey, Kristen, that's a really great question. And yeah, actually, I think I'm close to 30 years of experience kind of in that space. And actually, a good portion of that came on the vendor side of the world. So it's kind of interesting. Hopefully, I can give you both perspectives, as it were. One of the big things, as I look at, again, both from the vendor perspective when I was with a manufacturing ERP solution for many, many years, and probably, again, half that time also sort of on the client side of the world doing project management, and especially now being a part of Ultra. One of the big things that I've seen over the years is kind of, I would characterize it really as an overemphasis on the technology. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like the platform that it's built on necessarily, or even the programming language, or whether it's cloud or on premise. But I kind of look at it more in terms of people really are focusing on sort of the feature function aspect of the solution, and maybe the clicks or the number of clicks that it takes to get through a particular process, and almost, kind of put more emphasis on the beauty of the application, maybe sometimes, as opposed to the whether or not it fits their business. And so I would just, I guess, number one, caution people, right, that technology is definitely sort of a strong consideration, but it's probably one of maybe 5 or 6 considerations when you actually look at it. What I would also say is that probably the most important consideration, rather than even the technology stack or maybe the feature function, is whether or not it fits your business process. I've seen many clients on both sides of the world sort of come to the table not really understanding what their core business processes were all about, or if they did, there were some real flaws. Maybe they were non-standard processes, whatever the case may be. So just this overemphasis on assuming that the technology solution is going to be the kind of solution to all their problems, when they may have organizational issues that have nothing to do with technology. I think the other big mistake that people make is looking at sort of all ERP systems basically do the same thing, right? They all, are probably good at costing. They're all good at scheduling. They're all good at, whatever the requirement happens to be. And maybe there's not really a lot of difference. And that, again, gets a lot of people in trouble. You had mentioned the statistic about, 50% of ERP solutions fail. And I think it's really this sort of combination of 1 and 2, right? Sort of this, assumption that all ERP systems are created equal. They all basically, at the end of the day, do the same thing. So, again, we can pick anyone, right? And maybe they go for the big name in the business or whatever the case may be. But this assumption that all of the solutions kind of do everything equally. And especially in equipment manufacturing, machine building, that sort of thing, where you have very complex bills of material, multi-levels deep, where you might have very complex purchasing requirements or inventory stocking requirements. Those are some of the things, right, that are going to be the difference at the end of the day. So again, it gets back to really understanding who you are as a business, and sort of what your business requirements are. And so again, that's really key, because that should drive everything. Understanding your process, understanding what your business requirements are, and that should get you to the point where you really start to understand that while the base functionality may be very similar, there are going to be some key differences for sure to take into consideration. The other mistake I think people make is really this concept that, or this thought that we have to document literally every minute detail that we need in an ERP solution. And what often happens is either they get too caught up into the details, right? And it's just daunting to try to do that. or they simply go out and do a search on the internet and find the latest and greatest version of an RFP that they can present to the vendors, right? So you may decide, for example, that, hey, I want to look at 5 ERP vendors. You download this highly detailed RFP, and you basically send it to the vendors and you hope that they answer truthfully. The problem that I see with these RFPs, and probably the number one issue, is they're all presented to the vendor without any sort of context. You may present them to the vendor with a bit of your company background, but then at the end of the day, it's just this checklist, right? And we all have seen them, right? Does the software do it? Yes or no? Is it a third-party application, or, again, is it custom, or whatever the case may be? And it becomes this sort of, I keep coming back to using the word beauty contest, right? So who is going to get the most yeses, or the most check marks in the yes column? And that's who we award the business to. Again, pretty short-sighted, because again, it gets back to that point that I made earlier, where again, people think it's just about feature function, and that's all I need to worry about. And I know Michael later on is going to talk a lot about the other important aspects, the relationship that you want to build, the partnership that you want to build with the vendor, and that sort of thing. So again, I would just say that what we very often see is either people getting highly fixated on number one, the technology stack, or fixated on feature function that's expressed through these highly detailed RFPs. Michael, you may want to jump in actually. So we're kind of talking sort of these, sort of technical approaches to ERP selection, but I know that you've dealt with a lot of customers and prospects here at Ultra, where it's almost the opposite, right? They kind of base their decision on the emotional aspect of it. So can you talk maybe to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to keep the project at hand in mind and not make an emotional decision. And that can be a preconceived notion that you have coming into the selection. That could be a relationship that you might have with the vendor or the implementation partner. You might just really like the person that's selling it to you. And oftentimes they're very good at that because this is enterprise software. So you're going to find some very high-end salespeople. It's important to keep in mind the goal, which is to select the best software for the business. So you got to keep in mind functionality and technology and their go-to-market strategy and the vision of their leadership, and not let the emotional aspect get in the way of what is a very important 15 to 20-year decision.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I remember back in the day, we used to, on the vendor side, always talk to the client or the prospect that you never want to go through this in a generation. I mean, this can literally bring a business almost to its knees if it doesn't approach these projects, with the right frame of mind and frame of reference.
Right.
The other thing that I think is, that I've seen over and over again, is typically what happens is these initiatives, these projects start in the IT group. Again, because they're probably the most knowledgeable about the available technology that's out there. And so very often I've seen, the CEO or the CFO go to the VP of, information technology, or the IT manager, or the person that they may contract with, right, for their IT services. And they say, I'm going to put you in charge of this project. And the unfortunate aspect of it is while the IT folks are going to be extremely knowledgeable, right, in the technology that's out there, probably even to the level of the feature functions that are available, a lot of times the IT folks don't always necessarily understand the intricacies of the business. And again, I talk a lot about the importance of understanding business process and having the entire organization really involved in this selection process. So I think that's really critical. Now, I can tell you from our standpoint here at Ultra, one of the ways that we ensure that companies approach this, not just as an IT project, is from the very beginning of our engagement with our clients, actually even before the formal engagement during the sales process. We talk about the concept and the importance of deploying cross-functional process teams. And so as part of our methodology, as part of our kind of onboarding of the project, as it were, with our clients, one of the first things that we do to ensure that it's not just an IT project is ensure that we have cross-functional representation. So again, if you've been involved in either the sales process with one of our salespeople, or if you've gone through this process as one of our clients, you know that we're going to talk about work streams called design to deploy, opportunity to cash, procure to pay. And that's one of the ways that we ensure not only that all voices are heard, right, across the entire organization, but the issue is ultimately at the end of the day, every one of our business processes, no matter what it is, typically cross-functional silos. And so maybe kind of right along with this fourth mistake is, you know, people approach these projects looking at it from what do we need to get for sales? What do we need to get for you know, production out on the shop floor? What do we need to do for our folks in estimating or design or whatever the case may be? And that's almost as big of a mistake when you approach a project kind of with that siloed functional view as approaching it as just simply an IT project. So again, the importance of not looking at it as an IT project, ensuring that we're looking at it from really cross-functional capabilities is really, really important. Michael, I'm going to talk real quick about number 5 here, but then we'll sort of toss it over to you because you deal with the vendors through our Center of Excellence program. So the other mistake that very often we see, and it's, you know, again, very often no fault of our the people that are going through this project or this process, these projects, you know, there's a certain amount of brand awareness out there with these big name ERP solutions. Everyone here, you know, probably everyone on the call has probably heard of folks like SAP, Oracle, Infor, that sort of thing. And again, for the right manufacturer, for the, you know, right equipment builder, the machine builder, those solutions probably are very viable options. The issue comes, though, obviously, when maybe you're not a global enterprise with very complex requirements. Very often those big name solutions that we all hear every single day are going to be too complex, too burdensome, and at the end of the day, probably too expensive. And so the challenge becomes, okay, so if it's not one of the big 3 or the big 4, whatever the magic number is, you know, how do I go through that like huge list of potential vendors? Where do I even find them? You know, how do I even know who they are? So, Michael, I know this comes up a lot in the projects that we typically work with. We definitely have, you know, tier 1 customers that would, you know, typically want to look at and should be looking at SAP and Oracle and again, some of the big guys. But, you know, how does the client go about kind of evaluating or even considering or even knowing about all the other vendors that might be out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're right. We've all heard of the SAPs and the Oracles of the world, and there's a reason that they have that market share, because they continually are putting out great products and making enhancements to the products that they have, and they're staying current on technology. They can kind of be everything to everybody. Yeah. But that's not always the right approach for every company. That those companies will have different needs, requirements, budgets, depending on what kind of system they're coming off of. And you're right, it can be difficult to find detailed information on some of what we would consider tier 2s or tier 3s. There's a ton out there about the SAPs and Oracles and Microsofts of the world. But how do you learn about all of the other ones? And that's where a lot of the value work that we can provide to our customers comes in there, based on our years of research and evaluating these organizations. But one of the things that we look at is, what's the culture of the client? So what kind of system are they coming off of? If they're coming off of a very, if it's a smaller company with a leaner crew, and they're coming off of a legacy system or a homegrown system, they probably are going to be a better fit for the tier 2s and the tier 3s. So what we will do is provide an in-depth analysis of what the requirements are, and match them to the vendors out there that are in those tier 2 and tier 3 segments. So you've got vendors like Plex, who are very strong in automotive, and even some would consider them a tier 1 in automotive, but overall you consider them a tier 2. They're also strong in plastics, and they've also opened up a food and beverage practice. You've got vendors like IQMS, which was recently purchased by Delmia, and they're very strong in plastics. So if you're a plastics organization and you're smaller, it makes a lot of sense to evaluate these tier 3s. But how do you know that? How do you learn about that? There's not as much information out there about them. So one of the key areas of focus for us is not just looking at kind of the blue bloods, right, the ones that we all know about,
Yep.
but turning our clients on to some of the tier 2s and tier 3s that are still going to meet their business needs, are still going to meet their the requirements, are still going to meet their technology needs, are going to be within their budget, and probably lower their risk.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've gone into, and again, been on both sides of the world, right? Where I've gone into a client who would not be a typical customer for the vendor that I was working with, and they had no clue that there were other options out there, again, maybe lower in the market, right? And perfectly viable options. But again, just there was maybe a lack of brand awareness, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I can certainly attest, Michael, to the due diligence that you folks do as part of the Center of Excellence here, to make sure that people are aware of the options. And quite honestly, the work that you do takes a lot of the heavy lifting off that they would normally have to do, just in terms of, is the company financially viable? What's their product roadmap like? Are they keeping up with technology? So yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kristen, hopefully we kept it to just 5. I mean, that's part of the problem here. I probably could have articulated 50 mistakes that I've seen over the years, because there definitely are a lot of them out there. But I would definitely say these are probably, if not the 5 most popular, the 5 most impactful things that can really turn a project sort of upside down. So yeah, I would just say consider these 5 things and try to mitigate your risk by not focusing on them. So we'll turn it back to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you keeping it to 5. We could have a 2-hour webinar if we wanted to. Before we move on to our next topic, we actually had a question come in on RFPs. Could you give our audience who might not be familiar with the term sort of a brief overview of what an RFP is?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the basic level, RFP is an acronym for request for proposal. You might have even heard of RFI. That's kind of the other term or acronym we hear quite often, request for information. Basically, these are and again, on the manufacturing side, you probably get them from your customers, right? Basically, an RFP, an ERP RFP, for 2 acronyms there right in a row. An ERP RFP generally focuses on feature function, right? Probably 90% of most of the RFPs that are out there that you download are feature function, literally broken out by module. with very short statements. So you might have, CRM as the module and the ability to generate emails or the ability to track a sales funnel. So again, these RFPs can get very, very granular. I like to share the story. So I was working for one of the tier 3 solutions, actually, that Michael sort of referenced. And we got an RFP from a 20 employee machine shop. I think they were at probably maybe 2 or 3 million in revenue. We got an RFP from them that was 7,000 lines long. Way too much. And unfortunately, it was an RFP that had nothing to do with their business, right? I don't know where they found it, but as we talked through and interviewed the prospect, it was obvious, right, that they had downloaded, they had acquired this RFP that was completely taking them down the wrong path. And I see that a lot. Right, there's RFPs that are out there that might be, they say they might be full ERP RFPs, but they're definitely skewed a certain direction, either finance, overly skewed towards finance, or whatever the case may be. So again, just a really big caution if you're going to go down that route. And use them as a reference, but they should never be, in my opinion, sent directly to the vendor.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification, Dave. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked mistakes. So let's flip it over to the other side of the coin and talk best practices. You touched on earlier, selecting and implementing an ERP is a significant investment for any organization, and the decision affects the way the organization will conduct business for years to come, and pretty much every business function. So it's critical to find a solution that's suited to an organization's unique needs. So Dave, can you speak to some of the key best practices for a successful ERP selection?
Yeah, again, it's sort of a broken record. You always want to go back to understanding, first and foremost, who you are as a business, and maybe even more importantly, where do you want to be 3 to 5 years down the road? And again, maybe it was my 6th mistake back on the previous section. The other thing that we often see is people make the mistake and buy for today and the business that they are today. So whether that's, again, an equipment or machinery manufacturer, like the focus of the call is today, or you're a machine shop, or you're a one-off prototype mold builder, whatever the case may be. I think one of the best things that you can do that will surely add a significant percentage of assurance that this is going to be a successful project is partnering with an ERP solution that was built for your business. Again, there are a lot of what I would consider financial driven ERP solutions. There's a lot of generic ERP solutions. And again, you're going to get what you get, which is probably a solution that is either skewed one way or the other, or a solution that doesn't have the depth in terms of the feature and functionality of the solution that is really required. So especially today, you have greater selection today, and it all gets back to bullet number 1 here. Many vendors have either built from the ground up an industry specific solution and focus on that singular industry, or if it is a more general solution, they have configured it. Notice I didn't say customized. They have configured it and position it for a specific industry vertical. So there's a couple of vendors I know that we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail. that have actually done that, right? They've taken this kind of core foundational capability and have actually built out very specific industry capabilities within that core capability. And I think especially for industrial equipment manufacturers that, again, are on the call today, this is first and foremost. This is the thing, I think, the number one thing to get right. And again, it's a combination of industry experience, industry design solution, but also ensuring that you're buying for the future, that you're not just buying for today. Because again, we've seen, everything that's happened in the last year, for example, has caused changing business models, right? I know especially for industrial equipment, the service end of your business now is potentially where the big revenue growth is, right? So again, as an industrial equipment manufacturer, I wouldn't look at just capabilities for complex bills of material, scheduling multi-level bills of material, and that sort of thing. But again, if you're at least thinking about maybe having some sort of service aspect to your business in the future, I would start considering that as you go through the selection process as well. The other thing that's really important, and it's never too early to start thinking about it, is this whole total cost of ownership. What I would also say here is it's not just about the software cost, right? There's a lot of other costs that go into an ERP solution, namely consulting, implementation itself, training, and then potentially even ongoing maintenance. So you really need to understand what the total cost of ownership is. And I would put it in the context of not the dollars and cents just of the ownership, but understanding that in the context of what is the return on your investment. So where is the value coming from against that cost, obviously, that you have to invest. The other thing that you do absolutely need to consider, especially today, is what is your technology strategy as it relates to business systems, and how does that align with the potential vendor? I was just recently dealing with a customer going through our BPI and selection process, who said, I will not consider anything that is not native cloud, meaning I don't want to consider a legacy solution that they've ported over, right? Or that they're hosting. This particular customer was sort of what I would consider bleeding edge, even though this was going to be their real first full-blown ERP system. But their technology strategy was they wanted to be in the cloud. So it was cloud first for them. And again, in this particular case, it was a great kind of clarification for us, right? It helped us eliminate many of the vendors that they might have otherwise considered. The other thing that I think is really important, and I would also add here that it's customer references that are like you. Again, it gets back to industry experience, right? If the vendor, if the ERP provider, or the implementation partner that's partnering with that vendor doesn't have customer references that look like you, that do things that you do, that build product like you do, that would be a red flag for me, quite honestly. So again, it gets back to their industry experience. It's another way that you can look at that. And here again, I'm going to kind of flip it over to Michael here real quick. The other best practice is put the vendor through the required paces. You need to do due diligence on that vendor, just like they probably did due diligence on you when you became a prospect for them. You need to go through a vetting process. Now, this can be really, really challenging and quite honestly, extremely time consuming, right? So it's, looking at what do their financials look like? Do they have happy customers? What's their product roadmap look like? So, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you because I'm going to get in over my head real quick here, but I know there's probably 5 or 6 key things that customers or prospects that are looking at ERP solutions should be considering.
Absolutely there are, and I'll walk you through a little bit about how we go about our selections. Ultra Consultants has a center of excellence, of which I'm a part of, and our job is to keep tabs on what's happening in the industry. Ultra is an organization of, we've got about 50 consultants, and they are very client focused, and it wouldn't be reasonable to ask them to keep their ear to the ground on everything that's going on in the market and all the changes that are taking place. So we have a center of excellence, a group of people that keeps kind of a centralized database of what's going on out there that we can review with them and that they can access at all times. And we gather this information a number of ways: by attending conferences, by having them come and present vendor briefings to Ultra. These are typically a half a day. When we were traveling, we would go out to their headquarters for a day or two and do a detailed dive into the organization and the various products. So we're able to take all that and transfer that knowledge over to our customers. But before we start talking about which vendors, we have to define what are the key decision drivers, what are the big rocks that are going to remove certain vendors from the list. And we're not talking things here like general ledger. It's very important things that are very specific to your organization. So we had a food client recently, and the requirements were relatively vanilla, but the direct store delivery was a key component. So early on, we honed in on that.
So Mike, I think Michael, you made it funny there. You had a food and beverage client, but their requirements were vanilla. Oh, just kidding, Mike. Sorry. no pun intended.
Yeah. Yes,
they
made spices too. But so we were able to identify some of the key decision drivers, and then we're ready to start looking at the vendor list. And what we'll do initially is kind of look at what does the field look like for that specific industry. So if it's industrial equipment machines, we're looking at the major players across that industry, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. At first, we're looking at what's possible. And then we start looking at the profile of the organization. I was talking a little bit about this earlier. How big are they? How many employees? What is the sophistication of the team there? What is the change management going to be like? We start looking at things like that so that we can dig deeper into the vendor list. And basically, the goal is to get from that broader list down to a short list of anywhere from 3 to 5 vendors. And we do that by putting them through 4 filters. So the first thing we look at is functionality. So we need them to be able to meet the key decision drivers. They need to be able to meet the functionality at a basic level. If they can't, they're removed from the list. The second thing we look at is technology. So certain clients are going to have technology preferences. Some of them want to stay on premise, but more and more these days we're seeing companies want to go to cloud. But what type of cloud, right? A public cloud, a private cloud, single tenant, multi-tenant. Some people want to just stay on a hosted system. So helping them work through the technology requirements. Next, we talk about the investment. What's the total cost of ownership? We look at this both for investment in year 1 and the investment over the entire length of the contract, which is typically 3 to 5 years. So making sure that we're not putting a Ferrari in a Ford budget, as we call it.
Right.
And then finally, we look at what we call risks and insights. So this is kind of a catch-all and a major value proposition for Ultra, in that we've been doing this for 27 years, 500 plus projects. We've learned a thing or two along the way. So here we're talking about, well, how have other implementations that we've seen, how have those gone? Did they go live, and was it painful, and how long did it take, and how are they doing now? What's the go-to-market strategy? What's their investment in research and development? What's the executive team look like, and what's their vision? So it's things like that that you can't necessarily pull off of a Google search. Right. So that is how we arrive at a list. And all of this really eliminates the need for an RFP. So in Ultra selections, we don't actually send out an RFP. We create an invitation to participate document, which is going to have all of the major details. But we feel like because we do such deep research in our Center of Excellence, and because we've gotten to know the client intimately during our business process improvement process, and this can take between 2 and 3 months, there's no need for a detailed RFP. That's not a great use of time. So that is our approach to selections and how we reach a short list.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can share, Michael. So I've worked on a number of the projects. So for the people on the call, I have actually moved from the consulting organization into marketing. And one of the things that I think is a real differentiator is, again, as Michael alluded, instead of this RFP sort of approach, which are just a list of functions that have no context. What we do put the vendor through is what we call a day in the life detailed demonstration, like literally taking your process flows, and in some cases, even your data, with signed NDAs in place, that you can actually see literally from first contact with your customer in sort of a request for estimate, all the way through getting the order to shipping it out, scheduling the job, shipping it out the door, that you can see your process flows in the way that we envision, or that you envision your future state should be. So that's why, it's incredible. The process. I mean, I can tell you from our standpoint, it is a much more successful approach. Michael, I know that we have a big announcement today, if I remember right, something about a vendor guide that we've released. Do you want to maybe take it over from there and talk a bit about the brand new, hot off the press, industrial equipment ERP vendor guide?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. And yes, we are very excited to make this announcement today. There's lots of consulting firms and research firms put out all different sorts of reports. And for our recent batch of reports, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. We noticed there was a gap in that there's not a lot of reports that are focused on a specific industry. So a few months ago, we released our food and beverage report, which was a huge success, and we are privileged and proud to announce our industrial equipment and machines vendor report that is now available for you all to download. Why do we do these reports? There's a few reasons. Number one is thought leadership. I mentioned this a few minutes ago, 27 years in the industry and 500 products. We got to give the people what they want. So people have come to expect current research from Ultra and reports that we're releasing periodically. So it's to maintain our status as a thought leadership in the industries that we serve. And again, we are 100% focused on manufacturing and distribution. Number two, client education. As part of our business process improvement phase, where we are doing things like getting people organized, getting organizations organized, and mapping out current and future state and helping to define a business case, in between that current and future state, there are education and visioning exercises. And these reports are used to start having the client have some, or allowing them to learn a little bit about the vendors that they may be evaluating, kind of dip their toe in, so that their first exposure to them is not in a demo. So client education is the second reason. Number three, our Center of Excellence. So this is part of our research. And as I mentioned, our consultants are dependent on our Center of Excellence for their education. So it's also a way of educating our group of 50 or so consultants on what's going on in their industry, in industrial equipment and machines, and the different players and the vendors and where they're standing right now. So number three is our own internal education and allowing our Center of Excellence to educate our group of consultants. And then finally, vendor relationships. And I think one thing that really differentiates Ultra from a number of other firms is that we truly treat our vendors as partners. there's kind of an old school approach where, you've got the vendor over here and the client over here, and you've got the consultant in the middle, and never shall they meet. And there's not a real sense of partnership between the consulting firm and the vendor, but that doesn't typically end up well for what's the most important aspect of the project, which is the client. So we treat the vendors like partners, and we want to showcase them. And it shows that we have deep vendor relationships. We do ask a lot of our vendor partners when we are getting these reports together, because we have to sit down with them and do interviews and do demos and all these things to gather this information. So it's a show of partnership on both sides. So that is why we released the report, and we are very proud to release this industrial equipment and machines report.
Great, Michael. Thanks so much. And I know you guys are already down the path of our next one. So great job on this particular one. So yeah, great.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Say just real quick, I would be remiss. A couple of announcements here at the end, and I know we're right at our ending time. Obviously, the recording will be made available to you. So again, if you missed something along the way, if you missed something that you wanted to jot down, a link to the recording will be going out. Also, Michael alluded to the fact that as part of attending today, you will have first look at our new IEM ERP vendor guide. Say that 3 times fast. But I would just also like to encourage you all. We have literally hundreds of thought leadership articles, white papers, case studies. What's interesting kind of about this situation, we actually have a series that kind of ties right into this vendor report. So the first in the series was building your business case. So if you're early in the ERP investigation process, that's a great guide to kind of help you justify the potential investment. But then secondly, we talked a lot about at the beginning of the presentation, the mistakes that people focus just on the solution aspect, just on the technology, and forget that, hey, this is a great time to look at your own internal business processes. So again, we have a guide specific to that, building the foundation for your business transformation, talking a lot about business process evaluation, business process improvement. And again, that's an option that you can definitely talk to us about. And again, leverage the 500 client history that we have doing that particular service. Kristen, did you want to go ahead and end the webinar today?
Will do. Yep, we are running a little over. So we're going to go ahead and skip Q&A. That said, if anyone does have any questions, definitely feel free to send them in and we will reach out to you individually. So yeah, I really, that's going to conclude our webinar, but from all of us here at Ultra, thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. And thank you to our speakers, Michael Chesson and Dave Leckleitner, for sharing your expertise. We'd like to wish everyone a great rest of your day, and we will see you at the next webinar.